I'm Lisa Malbat. I'm the head of strategic communications here at TRIUMF. And I'm thrilled to have some of our friends here from Emily Carr University. This is Ingrid Koenig and Randy Cutler. And we're kicking off the start of a really exciting project today called Reading Out of Windows. And I'll leave it over to Randy and to Ingrid to speak more about that. But I just want to take a moment to talk about the relationship we've had with Emily Carr and with Ingrid and Randy that's gone for quite a while now, actually.
Well, since 2009, I've been coming here.
Yes, it's been a number of years.
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
and Ingrid is an artist residence here at TRIUMF, which has been really fun. And there's a number of opportunities we've had to go back and forth. There's a project called Broad Data. I don't know if we're going to talk about that.
We will.
Okay, so I'll leave that over to you then, because you were here for it. You'll speak to it better than what I've heard of the project. But we also are involved with Ingrid's studio class called Black Holes and Other Energy Transformations, which I think is really neat. Anya was over there this week actually to go and give a lecture in their class, and that studio class comes over to the lab for one of their sessions as well, which is really fun. So it's a really great relationship. I think it's a really neat way to explore science from a different perspective, to look at art from a different angle as well. So I'll leave it over to Ingrid and to Randy to talk about what we'll be involved with for the next few years. I think it should be a lot of fun, and I really do encourage you to come and take part for this project and some of the other opportunities that come forward. So,
Okay,
thank you. I think what I'll do is I'll give you a sense of what we're doing here today, so you'll understand the time. The idea is we're going to do a 45-minute presentation, more or less, to give you an understanding of the project, and then we want to leave time for a Q&A, so as many questions as possible. I guess something to think about is we want you to know the project that we're working on, the history of the project, and so one outcome is that we'd like to know if you'd want to be involved in the next phase of the project, which is designing at this point, a one-year experience where scientists would come in and work with us, the artists, to design an experiment, an art experiment. That's the first phase. The next phase would be a group of scientists would then come in January and present a science problem which was determined by you, the scientists, to a group of artists, and the artists would then go away and make the work. So really why we're here today is to give you an understanding of the project and see if you want to be involved in the next phase.
Yeah, and the project is actually funded, and just as I know that the physicists not getting funding is always a challenge because what is it for, what is it good for, and the same thing with artists is what is this good for. And so the Social Science and Humanities Research Council has funded us for 4 years and supporting this experimental venture into a crossover between artists and scientists, this conversation, to support this conversation. So it's been very important that to, I think, all of us, that this is seen as something that's a valid venture.
So maybe we should just go into the presentation. Is there anything else?
Just to say our collaborators, that who's involved. So, I mean, we've been really excited to have the support of TRIUMF. So, you know, right up to Rainer Perkin and Jonathan Bagger and Lisa Lambert are collaborators that came in at the start when we wrote our grant. And Tim Meyer, who used to be here, who has moved to Fermi Lab, is one of our collaborators. And for artist collaborators, one of our colleagues, Chris Jones at Emily Carr, he couldn't be here today. We have 2 German artists that have worked in a collaborative process for many years, and they will be joining us. And also an art and science philosopher and director of the Anton Bruckner University of Music, Dance, and Performance is also one of our collaborators, and she has a very particular process. She has published and tested over the years on this crossover, the potential of different languages working together. So
She's in Geneva.
In Austria.
In Austria.
In Austria, yeah.
Sarah.
Yeah.
And we have 3 of our research assistants here today. So part of our project, we get to work with research assistants. So it's Scott Mallory over there, Diana Hamish, and Heather Smith. So they'll be also involved, hopefully in communicating and working with you as well.
So we'll just dive into and we're going until, well, around quarter to, or we started a bit late, so about 5 to 11 or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just going to change out of my slides here. These are just many images of artists whose work is informed by science with a kind of a musical backdrop. Okay, so the name of this project is Meaning Out of Windows, and the premise of that, this is coming from a German term that's used informally to describe interdisciplinarity, and it's the idea, in German it's lehnen, aus dem Fenster lehnen, so out of the window leaning, and it's that idea that you're looking out of your own comfortable space, looking out across and beyond, and in that moment you also might be a little bit unbalanced, but you also have a sense of how another area, another discipline works, communicates while you're still grounded in your own discipline. So some of the main aims for our project, and this is in your handout as well, so exploring how artists work with scientists to develop a shared understanding of how knowledge can cross over disciplines. So what does that look like? Is it possible, and what does it look like? And we've seen that there's a large discourse now in the world looking at that. There are a lot of crossovers. So we're also joining that conversation, that worldwide conversation in this work of crossing over. And so we're wanting to develop some process of collaborations. So we're devising an experiment that would involve both disciplines of art and science and the disciplines within that, especially within art, the different languages. So to enable a hybrid research. So a hybrid research that has that broader kind of higher horizon of how something, what does a language look like from the point of view of a different language? Is it possible to translate that? So in this process, as Randy said, science frames a physics topic for artists, who in turn make material-based intuitive investigations and responses. So in that sense, TRIUMF physicists will determine what the science topic is. And in January, those physicists will present that topic to a group of artists. So we're curating professional artists and also student artists. So our grant actually allows us to pay students in our university to make work. So graduate students that are here as well. And so that topic will be presented to a group of artists, and from that we would have, it could be sound work, painting, drawing, sculpture, game design, a whole range of works. So the transformations, as it says here, are manifest in visual art forms that could include, as I said, sculpture, painting, drawing, performance, installation, sound, text, animation, interactive media, video games, and other cultural forms that we can't even imagine at that time. So our aim, to transform the grammar of abstract knowledge, so specifically addressing the barely discernible phenomena studied by physics through aesthetics, analogy, metaphor, poetry, and other inventive methods. So one of the things that I think in physics is one of the most fascinating things is about how you're dealing with the unrepresentable, in a sense, or that the barely discernible. Like, how do you even begin to talk about that in ways that are not mathematic based, for example? And that is one of the things that, as artists, we're also fascinated in joining the conversation that you're having at the table. So we want to sit at the table with you. And how do we bring those things? How do we talk about those things? And in a sense, it brings up questions of, do we approach it through intuition or hunches, and are there misunderstandings, and the storytelling, and we all need to invent new ways of interacting as well. So, as this text says, rather than consider how art might interpret science, our research project develops alternative models for collaboration. Oh, I forgot I was supposed to use this. Sorry. It's for our documentation. How art might interpret science, our research project develops alternative models for collaboration in order to trigger and achieve a deeper mode of understanding knowledge as a kind of moving performance. And that's something that the scientist Andrew Pickering talks about in his book Mangle of Practice, and this idea about how knowledge bumps against the world, so the kind of strings and attachments, and as soon as you talk about one thing, you have to talk about another thing, so that realm of that larger horizon of connections. And so if art at one time might have been seen as a kind of a service industry to illustrate certain kinds of concepts in science, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're looking at a different way of interpreting also the things that are very difficult to comprehend, and not necessarily through one work of art. Maybe that's not even possible. Maybe after a full year of different kinds of works, it's the assemblage of all of the works, the kind of the fabric, the carpet of all of the works that speaks in another way to something that is very difficult to express. So we're looking for a methodology that enables us to create a common space and a language in which it is possible to lean out of our respective disciplinary worlds in order to see our shared questions from fresh perspectives and to further the possibility of a deeper interdisciplinary discourse. So that sense that even though, of course, in your field, you need a great depth and understanding, but what happens when there is a leaning into that, and what can be communicated? So how do we make that common space? So one of the things in this project is trying to understand how do we make that common space, both for cultural movement, a cultural understanding of the questions in science, the phenomena that you are looking at. How do we, because why should culture be apart from that? It doesn't make sense. It's, of course, they're always working together in some way. You're the impact of knowledge across different areas. So that common space and what kind of a language is possible. So this is a testing. We don't know the answer to that. This is a testing of what is possible. I was just talking to Lisa about it this week when Anya came to my class, and she was speaking about the basics, particles, and using the word energy. And so someone put up their hand and said, well, what do you mean by energy? And you kind of think that it's a fundamental word and we all understand it, but it's actually used in many different ways. So what does that mean? And Scott was remembering, we were talking about this morning, how she was meaning it to mean potential, for example. So where I would never think about energy as potential necessarily. Talking about photons and light and how that is described as packets of energy. So what do we mean by that? So trying to get into a further kind of depth of understanding across areas. Because sometimes we use the words without thinking about how we're actually meaning it. And as soon as you start to explain it, it starts to bring in other disciplines and ancient histories and understandings as well. So that possibility of a deeper discourse comes up again. So these are some in conversations we've had with Jonathan and Reiner and Lisa, and also with Tim Meyer, is around some of these terms like metaphor, creative process, and communications. And so we're focusing on the importance of interdisciplinary methodologies for considering the outstanding questions of the universe. So that's what is being pursued by contemporary physics. And I think it's an understatement to say it takes a lot of imagination to describe an unfamiliar world. So in this venture, we're joining together artists and physicists to share the quest to understand the nature of reality. I can't think of anything more profound and exciting to spend one's life doing. So the diverse views, experiences, interactions bring each discipline to see a new perspective on the creative process, which also broadens the potential for communication between disciplines.
I'll just add here in conversations that you were saying that we've already had, trying to figure out why you would want to do this, why scientists would want to work with artists. And one of the few things that came up was, what can we learn from each other about creativity? We all work with creativity in our practices. And as Ingrid said, in terms of language, what do we actually understand as creativity? But what can we learn from each other? And so this kind of relationship that we'll have will actually help us to better understand some of the fundamental qualities in our practices. And one aspect of that was metaphor, that we both work with metaphor in different ways. So how can we learn about how metaphor is understood in our respective practices? And how does it function? Why do we need to go to metaphor to explain ideas that are about the reality of the universe? Because they're so complex, because they're unfamiliar, because they're unrepresentable. And then the communications issue was about the challenges for most physicists of working with very complex ideas, and often the way you communicate them is through mathematics, as I understand it. So one of the things that came up in our conversations was, what can we learn from each other about how to communicate these ideas through, not math, but through images, through sound, through text. So these are just some things, and we're interested to learn more about what you think this might do for your own practices. So how we can inform your practices and how you can inform our practices. There was at one point this kind of idea that in working together and looking at the results, the artwork, that it might inform your understanding of the science problem. You might go back and look at your science problem differently. That would be an amazing outcome. I don't know if it's possible, but we'd like to think we can help. But also, what can we learn from you about this idea of creativity and metaphor, and how do we communicate through non-mathematical language?
Also, maybe to add to that, so I'm an artist as well. I'm very curious to see that the forces you're working with and working on, they might also always be relevant in any way you interact with the world. So it doesn't matter if you're artists or scientists, there could be the same forces working on us all the time. So it's something I'm very interested in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And how we each in our own language construct an understanding of that, and how that translates itself is one of the things as well. I think that's there's a curiosity to see how that works. There's a quote by Peter Galveston, the physics professor and science historian. He always seems to be involved in any kind of symposium that's happening between art and science in Berlin. And he says, when we use metaphor, it's invoking different worlds together at the same time. So this is an example of 4 phases of a project, but just to kind of explain that this is just a sample, but something that we want to work out with you. But for example, right now, in the next few months, you decide on the physics problem, or not problem, but concept. We work together in a workshop on October 11th. We work together on ways of collaboration. So we have 2 artists coming in that have worked with collaborative processes across disciplines for quite a few years now, and they'll be working with us on how we can begin to work together. We will have a series of conversations after that, not necessarily through group meetings, but it might be through Skyping or a couple of people in a room to talk about ways that we could have multiple streams, test streams of working. So I'm just going to use this.
Turn it over. Sorry. Watch out for me.
Thanks. So in January, January 20th is the date that TRIUMF agreed would work for doing this workshop, or not a workshop, it's a seminar that would happen here. So a concept in physics is delivered to a group of artists and students. And this could be done through various means, through a lecture, through visuals. One of the things that we like to see is having some physics students involved as well. So that's one of the things that Rainer and Jonathan were interested in, so that they also have practice in how to present a problem to people that are not in their field. So not just in looking at how a concept gets worked through and translated in different ways, but also how do you even begin to talk about something to another group. So this, the kickoff of the concept happens, and there's a group of artists from painter, sculpture, and so on, and they're each having to work on a translation of this topic. Then there would be a stream, and this is what we're working together. So I don't want to describe too much because I don't want to affect the outcome in a way of looking too closely at that electron and then it behaves in a certain way. But in this stream, there might be another group of artists here, and they don't know what that original problem or concept was, but they're going to receive work by a few of these artists. And they'll have different disciplines as well, but based on the work they receive, they make a new work. So they're working blindly in response to that work. Another aspect here of a stream may be that because I will also be teaching a class, so that will be an experimental stream in its own. So they receive the work, or they receive the concept, and they make a work, and then they're allowed to talk to a physicist about the work that they did. So it's a back and forth. Then it goes on to another student, and they're allowed to talk to the physicist. So there's this kind of back and forth, a kind of a call and response that happens. So that could be another stream. Another stream, I don't know, but this goes on. So this group might have 3 months to do a work. This group might have 2 weeks to do a work, and so on. So it keeps going. So these variations of streams, and they would have until August. That's when sort of a cutoff time. We collect all the work, and in the fall, we would have what we call a translation hub. We're analyzing carpet of works. What happened in that? And in that analysis, we would like to bring in some other scholars. So not just have the physicists come back, but also, for example, a neuroscientist, a cultural theorist, so various people, and look at what is there. How did this idea kind of move through all of this work? Or did it get cut off somewhere? Did it get kind of lost and there's a debris pile of this concept that never went anywhere else? Or how did it transform and suddenly move into a whole other area? Or how did it kind of get into this whole other expansion of ideas? So those are some of the questions that we would be coming to. At this point, that would be next fall, we then decide, so how did this go? What do we think? We redesign the process. So devise a whole new set of streams and kick off again the following year with a new concept of physics and a whole new set of streams. And do it again, but based on variations. So then in the following fall, that would be 2018, I guess, again, we look at all the work. And in the end, after 2 years, we will do a full analysis of what happened with this whole process. And we have another 2 years to do analysis, documentation, publication, and a large exhibit. So that's sort of like this, the idea of a timeline. But our research questions, so coming back to that, in what ways can these transformative methodologies of collaboration work to engage with the diverse languages employed by artists and physicists? So how can we bring together between us all these languages? How can we work together to bring those together? And what possible models for interdisciplinary learning in the studio and science lab that are creative and effective generators of new knowledge and its visualization? What are the possible models for interdisciplinary learning? Does this give a sense of a kind of a hybrid way of learning as an alternative? I was reading an interview with Vaclav Smil that you're hosting as well as a speaker, and one of the things he says, he talks about, and this isn't criticism of anyone here, but he said it, so I don't have to take the blame, but he talks about drillers, and there are people that dig deep wells, and they look up and they see the round opening in the sky, and they know everything that there could be to know about that one circle within the sky. And he says, I like to keep a bigger open horizon. So I like that idea of, this idea of having an open horizon. So we have done, we did a pilot project a few years ago. It was funded by the Goethe Institute. And so I just wanted to briefly talk about that as well. Is there anything else that I should?
Oh, the only thing I would add to this, we talked about hybrid research and interdisciplinarity, and Ingrid sort of tried to give you a sense of what it could look like, but we really don't want to prescribe it. I think what we're interested in is the notion of this is an emergent process. We don't really know what's going to happen. And I think just to sort of add, one of the successes of the grant, from the feedback we got from the jurors, was they really liked the fact that we were working with scientists throughout the whole process, that you're going to work with us to varying degrees on designing the actual process. So we don't actually know what it looks like. And I find, there's a few things that I find quite exciting about this. One is the notion of collaboration, particularly leaning out of our respective windows, but also that it's emergent. We don't really know what it looks like. And I think that's a really important property for us to hold on to as we move forward, because in art, especially in the process of making something, you often don't know what's happening. And something might happen which really changes you might actually change your material, you might change your subject, so this notion of emergence to me is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. And that sense of mutual influence, mutual inspiration that we couldn't possibly know ahead of time what will come up, and we follow in a process, and that we're working through that process. And actually, David Morrissey, you did a wonderful quote at one time where you talked about working with our art students and seeing how, like in science, that the process steered them forward. So not necessarily knowing exactly what will happen at the end. So this is also, in a sense, devising the process that would steer us all in testing this process of how we might have a relay back and forth between art and science. So just an example of what we did in 2012. So this was funded by the Goethe Institute, and the title of this project was Raw Data, and this came out of a conversation with Tim Meyer, who thought this would be a great way that the physicists would present a physics problem, and the artists would make work, and then the physicists, so there you see the different disciplines within art making, so text, sound, body, image, and there's other involved in it, and I was also an artist involved in it. And their works get transferred. So the text work that Randy did got transferred to the sound artist. So he didn't know what the original problem was, and he had to work blindly in response to that. So this row of people, including myself, we didn't know what the original problem was, but we had to take the work that we received and then make work in response.
Well, interestingly, we've been calling it the science problem. The last time we got with Ryan, Jonathan was like, it's not really a problem, it's a topic.
Yeah.
So it's interesting in terms of language, the way we were, it's like, well, we were almost interpreting what you were doing, and then, you know, understood that that was a wrong, that phrasing didn't actually capture what was happening in terms of research. In terms of this process, I was at the original presentation, which was in this room, and it was on neutrino oscillation. And we had 4 hours, was it 4 hours?
Yeah, something like
It's a
that,
lot, you know, especially for those of us that don't, you know, speak that language. And it was wonderful. The presentations were very lively. But the challenge, as Ingrid was sort of presenting here, was you have all this information and you're asked to make an artwork. You can't put everything in the artwork. It's not, it wouldn't be a good artwork, and it's not the way, you know. So what happened was each of us responded to one aspect of neutrinos that resonated for us. So we all made very different kinds of work, pulling out different aspects of neutrinos. And then that got passed on. But I remember just for me personally, the feeling of how can I do justice to this idea? And you know, the instructions we had was, it's really about you responding to it. So we were given license not to feel like we had to replicate it within a scientific realm, but replicate it in terms of intuition, I think.
And so at the end, all of the works were collected, and we had a public transformation or translation hub discussion workshop on what happened, and we were basically asking the scientists to read the work as if it was raw data, and this was along the lines of what Tim Meyer had suggested to work in that way. So yeah, so we kicked off with Kendall Mann, who was at the time a researcher here. She gave the physics lecture on neutrinos. And this was in several forms. We asked if she could present it in not just one form. So she gave a lecture, she presented visuals, and diagrammatics. And so that was the beginning, and so here's an example of the kind of visuals she presented. But we gave it a lot of time so that it could be really, you know, kind of trying to learn this. And we also asked them to present an experiment. So the physicists translated that into, well, we'll perform the concept. So here they are performing the problem. So that was wonderful. Well, I wasn't there, but I think it was wonderful. And so and there's the artist trying to understand the problem. So another aspect of this work was, so that first group of artists, they make the work, and then they have to transfer it to another group. So how do we do that? And we wanted to have a kind of a random exchange, so we devised a bird lottery, and so with so a kind of a random number generator. So we would say, who will get Stefan's work? And so pieces of bread with names of whoever potentially could receive it. So Dennis could receive it, or Ingrid could receive it, or someone else. And then put that out there, and then the birds would come and choose who would receive it. So it was a really useful way to have that randomness come up. And then, so then we have the transfer. So this is one of the examples of Brandy presenting her work. The vast majority of the mass of the universe seems to be missing. A beautiful piece that you actually have here somewhere in TRIUMF. And Dennis is receiving it and just kind of being bewildered, like he was saying, well, you had that problem, but I have a whole new problem. And I received Stefan Smolovitz's work. So I wasn't really that astounded, but it was interactive work, and I had to make those faces to make the work. And so then we had this other artist that received work, so this is Sonnet Labé performing her poetry, so she had a response to one of the performance artists, and here's Randy's piece. And I represented mine with a drawing, not knowing that it was neutrinos, so this is working blindly. And we had a exhibition that was at Emily Carr, which was also plugged into a conference at that time on interdisciplinarity, and ours was around networked research and network partners in education. And we invited the physicists to come then to the exhibition and study the work. So they spent a good amount of time, they didn't talk to the artists, they took notes, they looked at the work, because we wanted them to respond to the group without knowing what the artist had actually intended, so that the discussion would be where these ideas would emerge. So it's a kind of a blind reading that's happening here. And then we had the open discussion amongst the both experimental and theoretical physicists, talking about what they read in the work, and then the kind of the back and forth of what went on. And so from this project, we took away aspects that we would want to change, redo, rebuild, make bigger. So we learned a lot from that.
For example, when we did this, the first group of us who came to the science seminar on neutrinos, we had 3 weeks to make an artwork. That's not enough time to make an artwork at all, especially if you have to do some post-production or some things that are not in your control. So I think one of the things we're interested in is can we give artists more time to make the work? So some might have 3 months, as Ingrid said, some might have 2 weeks, but I think that's something that we learned from the first version, is how to tweak it a little better, and hopefully when we get together in the workshop to design the whole thing, many of you have experience designing experiments, so that might actually feed into what we do as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And another thing about the translation hub, we realized we would like to have more disciplines involved in the analysis of the work. So that was another thing that we learned from that. So that's in a nutshell how it is, and so we're interested to hear if you have questions or suggestions at this point. The other thing that on your handout here on the second page, it talks about the workshop. So just to briefly, the workshop that we're inviting physicists from here, Tim Meyer will be Skyping in for that day. And this workshop is on a Tuesday from 11 until 3, and will include lunch.
At Emily Carr.
At Emily Carr. And so in that we discuss, for example, how artists could receive a physics concept, the length of the production period, the choreography of the artist-physicist conversations, how these things are going back and forth, the details about how works get transferred between artists and artists and back to physicists, and some talk about the translation hub in the fall. But those are the kinds of things we'll be discussing on that day, and ways of working, and then after that actually rolling up our sleeves and developing the process in conversation with you. When we got back the grant award, one of the things one of the reviewers said was, this is an important project because it is symmetrical. Usually art and science projects are asymmetrical, so one group is kind of leading everything and does the main production, whereas, or else it's a service where art might be the service to science. And in this one, we are co-designing. We are creating the platform for engagement together, because we really want to know how you would also see this unfolding. So that was an important comment that we've really taken to heart. And so from there we have these smaller conversations to develop those multiple streams. then in January, the topic gets presented to a group of artists by a couple of physicists would be involved at that time.
And that would be here.
That would be here, yes. And then, so they have until the end of August to do the work, and in the fall we have the translation hub where we come back together to look at the work, assess it, develop, kick off a whole new process with new streams. And yeah, that's just wanted to lay that out, how that would work. So I think that hopefully that gives you a sense of what we're wanting to do. And so if you have questions, or just even suggestions at this point, we're happy to take that.
So I just had a thought when you were recapping the previous project, where you translate from the science topic to one artist and then one artist to another artist. If there was benefit in the second layer of artists actually seeing more than one work, because obviously you capture only one specific piece of what resonated with the first artist.
Yeah.
But then maybe there's a bigger picture if you actually see
Yes.
what came out of what resonated with various people. And there's a different type of response, I would guess, than if you just look at one artist.
Right, yes, that's a
Great observation.
great, yes.
Is that something that reflects your own practice and how you look at a range of ways that physicists are tackling a concept in order for you to take your own work?
It's more like data sampling, right? So that you measure, how often do you actually measure something, and you get slightly something different every time.
Right.
And just as a whole, you get the right measurement in some sense. Or the picture emerges, right? You have many, even in experiments, you have sometimes experiments which only become really visible by having numerous measurements.
Well, what we could do potentially
Picture
is
emergence.
have a group of artists who see all the work, and then some artists who just see one.
That would be interesting to see.
Yes, that's a brilliant idea.
Can I ask you something related to this? It's not clear to me why you have introduced this second layer of blindness. Why is this point where you have an artist interacting with another artist? This is a place where it's not symmetric anymore between artists and physicists. Maybe you said that I missed the point. What do you want to achieve by that, or why is that second layer necessary?
Yeah, good question, and we didn't address that. This is coming from this methodology of aesthetic transformation that, which is developed based on a game of broken telephone. In a sense, you communicate something, but you don't quite hear it, and then it gets reproduced in a different way, and so on. But it's also an idea of taking inspiration from one person and looking at how that transforms. So this idea of transformation comes up. I think it is a kind of an experimental process of what can come through an artwork without saying this is about this and this and this. So does an idea from another language, can it be translated through a whole different language without having that initial sense? So really testing the potential of languages, different languages for translating something. Does that make sense? And sometimes that idea might get lost, but then picked up again in a later rendition if it kept getting translated through many. So it's that kind of look at then at the end, not necessarily looking at just that one evolution of something, but looking at all the works that came out of that, and maybe it's in a collection of all of them that we get to reassemble what that original concept was. So this is a methodology that we're testing. But we would like to test variations on that. Yeah, David?
Okay, so actually, I had exactly the same thing. So it's sort of, the breaking with the symmetry, also like a function of sound or something. We're heuristic that symmetries will already on us, but I'm wondering if, after the first artistic creation phase, if you were to have these works then fed back into a group of physicists, maybe a different group of physicists, to interpret them and to see what physics concepts they get out of these works, and then transmit that to a second stage. So partly, it feels more symmetric.
So you're saying that the physicists would see the work and determine whether it relates to a contemporary science topic?
Or just, not necessarily directly, but let's say, what science topics do they get out of the piece? Like what comes to mind? What inspires them in terms of science from this piece?
And then what would they pass on then to
This new set of concepts.
a new set of
This
concepts?
is a new set of science topics.
So the input might be neutrinos, but the output might be a whole other science problem that then gets, at the end it's presented to a different group of artists
Yes.
as a longer relay and greater symmetry.
So at least this is more symmetry between artists and scientists. And then, I understand where you're going for the telephone picture, but I guess one thing that we're also trained to do as scientists is to try to avoid that. We try to be crystal clear. And I guess just the way science works, at least if it's working properly, that's exactly the thing we're trying to avoid.
Right,
I realize there's worlds here, but I'm literal here, but I'm wondering if somehow bring the art back to science, just to symmetrize it.
And is symmetry an important part of what you do?
Oh yeah, it's sort of everything.
Really? And how would you describe symmetry in terms of what you do? Like, it's everything.
I mean, it's a thing. It's a thing that brings order to chaos. In a sense.
So symmetry in a articulation of a concept, symmetry in the equations, just trying to understand what symmetry looks like for you.
A lot of times, understanding a scientific concept comes down to understanding an underlying symmetry related to it.
An underlying symmetry in the universe.
In a lot of cases, yes.
It's interesting how we talk about symmetry, and I wonder in this sense how if you could also see it as a potential, if not just one artist is working on a problem, but then there's another artist that doesn't know the language about it, but responds to video. And I'm wondering about the potential of that and how this symmetry could be traced back with maybe two physicists responding to it, or like get more weight to get more complete again. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but it seems like a lot of leaning out of the windows in this sense because you're having like two artists or the focus on one again without this coming.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I have in mind, let's say a second physics layer to respond to the first artistic piece.
Right, which is really, I think, a really good point.
Yeah, yes. Which you might come back to neutrinos from peaks.
You might,
Yeah.
which would be spectacular.
Yeah.
There was actually
You and then Marcello?
So with that communication going back to the physicist, there's different, depending on how much information the physicists have, they can go completely off the rails to a different topic altogether, which can be interesting just to see, you know, what were the connections beginning with that led them to go from neutrinos to, say, physics of how a volcano works. It might be something completely different, but if the second physicist who's reading the art has some information about what the original physics was, two things may happen. One, they may try to rewrite exactly what it was the concept that can be described, neutrino oscillations. If the second physicist knows that it's neutrino related, like, oh, this is oscillation stuff that the person is trying to get across, which, okay, you've kind of tested, you know, can you reassemble the message when a little bit's lost? Then you could potentially take it further and get the physicist to read some information to get some new stuff. perhaps new physics, that then goes back to the artist. Say, for example, if the artist makes something that he can interpret as data for the physicist, and the theorist may take it and say, okay, well that looks like a bump in a plot, or we've never had a bump before. Maybe they can then derive a simple theory that can explain the bump in the plot as a new part of resonance that they've not thought of doing before because it's been plot they never studied before. And that can go back to the artist. So then the physicist actually done new physics piece of work, maybe published or independence. And it's taking them to a different piece of creativity that originated from the artist's creativity. So going in different directions to prove that
I think that's really exciting. I think that's one of the ideas we had, was this notion that what we do is to actually inform your own practices and sort of feed some information, like in the case of neutrinos, back into what you do. I think it's really important for us to hear that this is something that you're interested in, partly because then we can sort of figure out whether that can fit into the experimental design, and that's something that you would want to do. I know for both of us, we're really appreciative of you wanting to work with us, but we also want to make it beneficial for you in some way. So this would make it more interesting, whether it's more symmetry or this kind of second layer of the physicist. That's really important for us to know, because I think I'm not saying we've been conservative about this, but we're trying to generate a project that actually is going to be mutually beneficial, right? So if this makes it more beneficial, that's really important for us to do.
Shallow.
I just wanted to say a few more things about symmetry in physics. Normally when you talk about symmetry in physics, it's in the mathematical sense. So in the mathematics, there's a symmetry, like you get the same answer if you put in a positive number or a negative number. That's simple, very simple version. Sometimes it permits a geometric translation. So you can interpret the symmetry geometrically, and sometimes it's not that easy.
Geometrically, do you mean in a kind of visual representation?
A visual representation of the symmetry. But we talk about it in a mathematical sense. Sometimes it permits this visual imagery, and sometimes it's not so easy. So we do, think oftentimes there's all these diagrams, the eightfold way, various things that show the symmetry in a graphical kind of a way, and other times it's not. But we use the term symmetry in the mathematical sense.
Not in an ideological sense.
Not in an ideological sense.
And symmetry is such an interesting term to know that it's something that you use in your practices, because I think in visual art, there's a kind of, we're not as invested in symmetry, or maybe our understanding of symmetry is interpreted very differently in terms of color balance or composition balance. So I think that could be really fascinating for us to take this forward.
Yeah. And I also grabbed, like, in that philosophical sense of symmetry. I was watching a documentary on, it was a question about particle behavior, and where there's still, I forget what the actual question was, I'm sorry, but they were saying, well, one way we might look for answers is looking at what happens in nature. So things reproduce in nature, do this and that. So looking at that as a way of, can we apply those things to this problem? So I don't know if that's another way of looking at the kind of symmetry of something that happens in one place and how it applies to another, if that's another, like a kind of philosophical example of that.
There's various usages of the term.
Yeah.
But when a physicist would talk about it, it's in the mathematical sense.
Right.
Right? This equation is symmetric under a certain transformation. And it helps to simplify things. Like David says, it brings order out of chaos. It helps to categorize things. It helps to simplify things.
Yeah.
And it turns out that nature seems to have these, when you're using our mathematics, they seem to have these symmetries. It's just sort of the way it turns out. It didn't have to be that way. It's just sort of the way it kind of came out.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make the point that one has to be careful in the usage of the language when you're saying symmetry. You don't want to have two people using the same word and have it mean completely different things.
Right. So right away we get into this question of the concept of language. It's the multiple meanings. One of the things that we learned from working in that raw data project was, I forgot to say that, I think, that the first group of scientists who talked about the work they saw did not know what the original problem was. So we made sure that they would not know. So we could hear from them how they blindly see the work and say, oh, this is about this or that, or they would say, I have no idea. So, but we wanted to see what would happen, whether an idea could come through those works and emerge again. And that had a mixed ability. So, and then the second group of scientists who were involved in the problem that was presented, they could then speak to how well it carried through. But we found that the question of does the original physics problem, does it carry through? That became a question of is this the test? Is this the test we want? So I really appreciate what you're saying about a different way of looking at this, a variation on that original one, which is exactly what we want to do, is test variations. Yeah.
I like this idea of the test for this simple reason is because, like I said, it's not all of these symmetries and ideas that we have in the math are not readily transformable into geometric or graphic interpretation. But that could be just because we physicists aren't that creative. It'd be very interesting to see if you artists come up with some kind of a graphical or artistic representation of these concepts, which we just didn't think of. And then we look at it and go, oh wow, yeah, I see where how this kind of works.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the potential there for enlightenment. Because we're physicists, we're scientists, we're not artists.
Right, and that's the whole idea of hybrid research, that mutually we can actually inform each other's practices. I'm just wondering, Ewan, in terms of your comment about going back to the physicists and then that one, how much time, this is just a hypothetical question, would the physicists need, like if they receive the artwork, to then generate a response?
Depends.
Yeah, it depends.
At least 5 years of
Yeah.
So
It depends on how faithful to exterior physics the physicist allows himself to be. If the art piece says, this would be the solution to that one problem that the art piece is raised, but it entirely breaks this other field of physics. Normally the physicist would say, okay, well, that can't therefore be true, so I won't look at that. But it's obviously physics has to be consistent with competitiveness, but so it somewhat depends on whether or not they restrict themselves just to the physics within that art piece,
Right.
or the broader world. But if you do restrict yourself just to that one art piece, it somewhat depends on how much of a transformation has been undertaken away from the original piece that they received from the physicist. If you first physicist gave you just a straight line, and the art piece ended up giving a slightly different straight line, the theorist could easily interpret that pretty quickly. But if the straight line turned into the Mona Lisa, that's a huge amount of effort for the physicist to now turn a straight line into the Mona Lisa and to explain all of that, how that happened. They're very, very different.
So it's intriguing when you think about when we did the raw data, the artists were given 3 weeks, which was not enough time. And in some ways, maybe there's a similar problem that physicists have, which is what's a suitable amount of time to respond to a work, depending on what the expectations are, right? So we've had discussions with our collaborators about, like Ingrid and I would really like the artist to receive as much time as possible, because we understand how important time is in figuring things out. And so one idea on the table is actually maybe the artist only has 2 weeks. So what would it look like if physicists, one group of physicists had 2 weeks to work on it, another group had 3 months? Would that, like I'm thinking again in terms of symmetry, not mathematical, but like just figuring out ways that would actually make this experiment resonate for all of us, and actually something that reflects your practice, right? Because like for us, we were uncomfortable having so little time. Clearly, you would also be uncomfortable having so little time, right? But what would be acceptable? Yeah.
Just a thought, I'm not a physicist myself, that's what I'm learning by seeing what people do here. How about introducing a bit more collaboration? I mean, the second layer of artists will actually make, in terms of, you know, interdisciplinary approach and how much easier it actually makes that work happen, and how much, like, how, if you need less time to actually approach it. I don't know, it's like, and I think about solving a problem, I think of it not as a one person who was exposed to that problem for 4 hours and work on that. But in our fields, we constantly need to talk to other people. We have to compare how we understood it, if we understood it correctly, and how to go for that further. But that's something which could make it a bit more interesting on the second line. We will see immediately what happens if an artist is committed to work alone, and then, let's say, working only once a week or once in a second with a physicist, and actually discuss it at a different level, and see how that actually.
I think that was definitely one of the potential streams that we wanted to explore. I mean, I guess it depends on how invested you are in the project, because that's a commitment, right, in terms of that dialogue. But it also makes me think about, in terms of the collaboration between the artists and physicists, what does that collaboration look like? In some ways, is it a conversation? Is a physicist, you know, making drawings alongside the artists? Like, so there's all those ideas about, and it would obviously depend on the respective physicists and what they bring to it in terms of their artistic engagement, their ideas about creativity, right? That's a lovely addition to it.
Yeah, I had that experience one afternoon with Claire David, who's a researcher here for a while too. And so we sat down at a table with paper and talking about quantum field theory. So she was explaining and using, you know, little diagrams and so on, explaining things. And then I would take it into my own area and think, okay, well, what about, can we do this with it and apply it this way into like a human experience, like taking it out from quantum and putting it into human experience, which I know is ridiculous, but just like, let's do that. And so I would ask questions and kind of thing, and then she would respond again with, you know, this way, and draw something and interfere with my drawing. And we kind of did this back and forth, which was so exciting to have a different way of understanding something. So I really would love that that to happen again. Maybe not that kind of close, but that was an example of how I did it. Another thought. This is really great just to hear right away some responses for some ways of working.
I have another question about this interaction. I wonder in general how important it is to have how the process is lined out to make it worthwhile to have a feedback. So maybe it might all fall apart if it's like too much time or too little time, and this is kind of destroyed and how we work together.
For me, I asked that question because I wanted to understand why there is a certain pattern, and if I don't understand why, it's less interesting. Then I also thought about the symmetry because you mentioned that this project was so successful because it was seen as symmetric between artists and physicists, and there is where I saw a point where it was not symmetric. So I was asking, why is that? And you explain that, and now we are trying. Everyone seems to agree that putting some more interaction with physicists in the endpoint there would create interesting outcomes.
Because it's a really constructive thing that we make up. It doesn't seem to be.
I think it all kind of boils down to us trying to understand why things are made that way and see whether there are other possibilities, because that's what we do all the time.
And those questions are wonderful sometimes, as you know, when you're so inside something. You know, it's part of, like, as Ingrid said, it has a kind of, it's not that it's trademarked, but it has a practice, there's discourse around artistic transformation in this way. But to have that simple question posed, I think is really useful. And also to hear what would make it more meaningful for you.
I think back to the other talks about science communication and whether or not you can come up with a way of depicting some symmetries you haven't done before. There's in science communication, there's a lot of things that we currently have a hard time explaining to the general public, and these occasionally often go towards metaphors and analogies and things like that. So it could be interesting as another side of it to find some topics that this is currently a hard time describing to the public, and working with an artist to develop new analogies or metaphors or stories and finding ways to communicate it to the public. And then maybe the artist takes it a lot further and builds a whole story out of it, a novella based on an analogy.
Yes, yes.
There are certainly some areas where we're missing something. I think an artist made a perfect analogy for us that sounds beautiful, elegant.
Yeah.
Or a visualization that you weren't
Or
able
a
to.
visualization for that little piece we were missing. That we can then actually send politicians saying, this describes why we want money to do this future research. That would actually be directly applicable to future physics backtrack.
Right.
It's funny, as you're talking, it makes me think about, I don't know, do we ever ask the question last time for raw data, why did they choose neutrino oscillation?
No, it's just a hot topic.
Yeah.
But no, we never did ask them why.
Because I mean, that's interesting too, in terms of what do you, like, some of the things we've talked about is, in the scientists choosing a topic, are they choosing it because they want to know more about it? Are they choosing it because they think it might really work within an art context? Like, so I'm also intrigued by what informs that selection process, because there's so much you could potentially explore. Because initially, in discussing this, we were saying, maybe we work with you on giving you specific criteria that would inform how you select the topic. And then we said, no, we don't want to inform this too much. So we're sort of like that back and forth. So yeah, I'm just wondering, like, why did they give us neutrinos? But there's so
It
much
may have a
there.
boring answer, or it may have an
Yeah, but I remember there was just so much there. There were so many layers of ways of thinking about it that it had a lot of entry points. But I don't know if that's what the scientists were.
Another example of what you're talking about, one year Abhishek Kumar, he asked me if he could give a talk. He was preparing a talk on dark matter for a TEDx talk, so it was like a 10-minute talk he was preparing. And he asked if he could come to one of my classes, and it was a drawing class, so they didn't sign up for any science at all in that class. So I brought him into that class, and he gave a talk, very, time, 10 minutes, dark matter. Then we had 45 minutes of discussion. It was amazing. And they were asking him about a particular thing about how do you, I don't remember the exact question, but how do you know to weigh this, where do you start, how can you weigh this particular thing, something? And so he gave an answer, like an analogy. Well, it's like this. And everyone was sitting there like, no. And so then he tried another analogy. Again, everyone was shaking their head, didn't make sense. The third analogy, he said this, again, a different story, it's like this, and everyone suddenly goes, oh! And it was so amazing to see how all the lights suddenly came on. Just by, switching, by changing that story a bit, the analogy, and now a room, suddenly understood something that's very abstract and foreign to them. So that finding of that kind of back and forth of testing, that was actually a moment for me of thinking about moving towards this project and this testing of this. That was a real great moment. So, if there's anything else at this point, I understand.
One
Yeah.
curiosity. So we are trying here to communicate the scientific concept without using mathematics, more with analogy and with visuals. But to an artist, is a mathematical formula aesthetic or not? Because for me it is, as a theorist especially, and I'm curious what.
It is aesthetic, but we don't know what it means.
That's a great point.
What's that?
That's a great point.
So I do see more aesthetic because I understand what it means.
But for you, I would assume that part of the aesthetic is that not only is this, maybe a simple equation can explain a very complex process, it looks good in its simplicity and concision, but also you see it and the choices, I don't know what I'm talking about here, but the choices of the symbols that you use to describe it have a certain elegance to it,
Yeah.
right? But for us, I would find the symbols beautiful as symbols, but I wouldn't know what they mean. I think what could happen, and I think when we did the neutrino oscillation, they did show us some symbols. And I remember for me, I enjoyed that part of it. It didn't help me understand it anymore. But then I could take those symbols away and make something with it if I chose. But then it becomes a signifier without a signifier. It's not really clear how I'm using it. If you were comfortable with that, then, but certainly the mathematical equations are fascinating for us, but for different reasons.
But that doesn't mean that, I would love to hear, kind of the unpacking of that formula. Just say, well, what is it about this that makes it so elegant, or what to actually have that opening up of something. That would be amazing to make it less opaque. So that would be beautiful. Yeah, David?
Okay, yeah, no, actually, yeah, so I did kind of get the feeling that there's a lot of talk about, let's get away from mathematics. I pitched hitting the mathematics more straight on, in the sense that, yes, we have these funny symbols, and it's kind of a cryptic language, but, I mean, this is just a way of packaging a set of ideas. And mathematics at its heart is a set of ideas that are constant, a set of objects. Maybe this is a bad analogy, but I mean, a great piece of literature is the letters on the page. In the same way the great mathematics isn't just a set of symbols, it's the ideas, the concepts, and so on in it. And the same thing goes with mathematics. And I realize the language used to describe it, these ideas, can be very esoteric and take training to learn that language. But that's not really what the math is about. Mathematics is really more the set of ideas and objects and so on. And I guess I don't want to say yay math in the sense that it's not the symbols at all. It's just literally just a way of expressing it. It's more these ideas, and the ideas can be explained with other symbols. It's just the symbols are a shorthand to do it.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yes, Marcello?
That's one of the sublimely interesting things about theoretical physics, in that you use the mathematics which have strict rules. And that's why you use them. You just can't make shit up, right? There's strict rules. However, there's a tremendous amount of creativity in how you can employ these rules to try to describe what it is that you're trying to describe. So it's a very interesting marriage between creativity, and it really is creativity. You're just dreaming up different ways of doing things. However, you're operating within a strict framework which doesn't allow you to get off the rails too far, right? So it really is a wonderful marriage between the creative brains, artistic brains, and the strictly, reductionist, methodological. Yeah, whatever. Part of our brains. There's a marriage of the two.
Yeah. Well, that sounds crazy exciting to think that we would actually take on mathematical, and that idea. Like when you were saying about literature, just letters on the page, I think about, there was Nella May who said it's like insane that everything we do is based on 26 characters. Like, how is that possible, right? And I think I see that analogy.
I mean, those are just efficient ways of packaging a much smaller set of ideas.
Right.
It also makes me think about different kinds of artistic practices, some which reject symmetry or some that reject kind of concision. But certain kinds of artistic practices have their own symmetry or have their own elegance. Working with in the same way that the mathematics is a way that you can express creativity, artists are working with rules as well in order to express creativity. So I think there's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah.
I think when you said that, it also made me think about comfort. So for me, the example you brought up about the book and reading a book, a certain book of a certain author can bring me a lot of comfort, but I also think of a formula can make you bring comfort as well to have that written out in that way. And then it's more than just a symbol, it's actually something deeper that helps us live.
I guess we get a little bit of comfort when we see a nice formula, right?
But then what all this suggests to me is that we're not just working with trying to understand a specific science topic and how we might, learn from it, but also understanding our respective ways of working and the more, when you say the word comfort, the kind of the affect, what it produces in us as creative practitioners, that our respective practices feed us, they inspire us, so it's not just the like resolving a science problem, but it's also the process of doing what we're doing as being as equally important as solving a problem. Maybe that's more about humanity's perspective, but it's nice to hear that in the process of doing your work, there's something comforting, or there's something aesthetically pleasing, or there's something working on a kind of, I want to say emotional, but I think it's even pre-emotional, but something that actually taps into why you're doing it. And it's not just about solving the big problems of the universe. It's about being a human being and contributing and experiencing a kind of range of, it's hard to find the language here, but I feel like there's a lot of different things that could possibly happen here that's not just about the science topic.
Scientists use terms beautiful, elegant, about equations which are otherwise look like chicken scratch all the time, right? And they seek elegance. Like Einstein's general theory of relativity is considered one of the most beautiful and elegant equations ever written down. If you don't know what it means, it just looks like the letter G and the letter R and the letter T. But it's because the way it's concise, the way what it encompasses, what it represents, the amount of knowledge which is condensed into such a simplified form, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. And that trying to strive for elegance and having it be beautiful is certainly part of the scientific ethos. Ugly, it works, but it's ugly. Like the Standard Model, you'll hear this term all the time. Incredibly successful model. In fact, we're having a hard time trying to find out where it doesn't work. Neutrino oscillations is one place where it doesn't work. But it's ugly. Everybody says it's ugly, it's got too many parameters, it's gross. We need something that's better looking.
Really, so that was my question. So is this something that you talk amongst yourselves about?
Absolutely.
And is this part of the training, like, those who are still students, is that, you don't take a course in aesthetics necessarily, but is that part of your training as students?
I think it's just part of human nature. We just want it to be nice and simple. It turns out, things didn't have to be easy to write down and have to appear in some concise form. It didn't have to be that way. It just sort of turns out that, as we progress in our understanding using the mathematics the way we've developed them, that you can write down some things in relatively compact, simplified forms, which do encompass a tremendous amount of knowledge. It just sort of turned out that way.
We don't try to write down things in simplified forms just for the sake of aesthetics. I think the goal of any physics problem, whether it be even a homework problem or something a theoretical physicist is trying to do, is to come up with laws that answer the highest number of questions possible. And that means that the more we advance, the simpler the laws become, because the more questions can be answered by relatively fewer but more general laws. So, for example, before quantum mechanics came along, there was Newtonian mechanics, which, well, a lot of things came before quantum mechanics, but they describe very specific situations. For example, Newtonian mechanics described situations in which you were moving pretty slowly compared to the speed of light, and but then when general relativity came along, now all of a sudden we have this law that encompasses Newtonian mechanics at the limit where the velocity is very low, or very low compared to the speed of light. But it also it also lets you predict what will happen when you get faster and faster. So now we've replaced both, one law for low speeds and another law with high speeds with the general relativity that encompasses all the possible situations. So yeah, the simpler we get, the more beautiful it looks. But And yes, so we are being trained to make things more beautiful, but not for the sake of making it look beautiful on a piece of paper. I think when people say it's beautiful, what they mean is that it describes so much more of reality than we ever expected it to be able to.
I think certainly a good approach would be a way for artists to try to depict the outside world, kind of how we understand beauty in physics and mathematics, and maybe give an example of, okay, this is, say, like Maxwell's equation written out in its most expanded form, and then in that ugly version of it, you have a bunch of artistic interpretations in it. And then, as you can show in history, as we manage to simplify it, make it more beautiful, these Maxwell's equations, you could have other pieces of art that parallel that until we finally reduce it down to a single Maxwell's equations, most beautiful form, and then reduce it down to a single piece of art that encompasses all of that information in a single place.
For me, one of the most exciting moments in looking at art or making art is when there are multiple layers of meaning within it, so that it is relevant, say, to, I'll just give an example of an artist I talked to you the other day. It's relevant to understanding a bird's flight. It's the beauty of the bird, it's the understanding going into the brain of the bird, it's looking at the landscape through its viewpoint, but the landscape is made of thread, it's sewn, it's topographical, it brings in geophysical, so that there are multiple ways that something comes at you, and you understand all of these linkages. To me, that's like the equivalent of something that's really intensely beautiful in the sense of getting the depth of an experience and all that complexity of what something actually is and all these different connections. Does that jive with what you're saying? Yeah.
Just quickly on the comment. Yeah, so in general, a better theory, we generally consider better theory one where you have kind of a single structure that describes more physical phenomena.
Yeah.
So if I have a bunch of different descriptions, I'm able to come up with a single one based on a single structure that describes all the different ones, that's considered better theory. But I mean, theory is only part of science, you also have experiment. An experiment comes in and finds new physical phenomena, and we need to build new theories for it. So in some sense, doing theory better makes things simpler, but the experiment finds new stuff that theory has to tack on more stuff. So it goes back and forth. So in some, I want to say it's like black and white, but theorists are trying to simplify, experimentalists come along and tell us, okay, we can miss this, and this can also happen, we need to describe that as well. So there's a back and forth.
Is experimental physics messier?
Yes.
You
If you like really run the experiment, then you kind of expect to see something, and when you see something else, you are more excited about that something else than what you expected to see.
So it gets messier.
Well, it gets more interesting for us because we hope to see that new physics behind it.
Yeah. So messy could also be translated as interesting.
Absolutely.
Because part of what I'm thinking here is a lot of the artwork that I'm invested and engaged in is not beautiful in any conventional sense. It's not reductive to representing so much. It actually challenges the very expectation of beauty. And it suggests that beauty is very much culturally contingent, or it's informed by so many things that are ideological in some way. So this conversation is quite fascinating because there are ways in which, we can share some ideas, but there's also so much of art practice is actually contextual and challenging the conventions of the day. So artists, I think, often are not trying to make something that's beautiful, they're trying to make something that challenges beauty, or the expectation of beauty in some way.
Can I respond to both that and what you just said? So I work on an experiment, the Francine Carity non-conservation experiment. And I disagree that experimental physics is more messy, or maybe perhaps I misunderstand what you meant by that. What we do as experimentalists is we look at reality itself. So unless we record something incorrectly, or unless our instruments aren't working like we think they are, what we write down is reality. We're looking directly at the effect of the model. And that might not even be accurate. The model might not even it might be just coincidental that the model works in all previously seen cases. But when we do experiments, we're directly asking the question, how does this work? And if we do everything right, we'll get an answer. So yeah, it's not as beautiful in terms of course, experiments aren't as precise as theory, and it's not as simple, and it's like comparing, I don't know, something geometric like MC Escher to some urban art I've seen where it just looks like paint all thrown on the canvas. I guess experimental physics would be more like the modern art, the urban art. But you know, when you look at a painting like that, you're not seeing the artist trying to do something. You're seeing the result of what he put on the canvas without any, he's not even attempting to make something coherent. This is just how the paint ended up on the canvas. And so that, I think, is more akin to an experimental project where, you know, whether it adheres to the model or not, you know, we're not supposed to care whether, well, we do care, but we're not supposed to let it influence the outcome of the experiment. We are just looking at the result of how reality happens to be.
It's so wonderful here that we're creating analogies in the process of trying to understand, you know, the relations between theoretical and experimental physics, between physics and art. We're already working on a level of analogy here, which I think is quite fascinating, in order to better understand what we're talking about. If it is a common language.
Yeah.
Okay, any other bombs you want to throw with? This is really great. Really wonderful to hear some of your initial comments. So the next stage of things, if you're interested, I guess Lisa will be connecting with you, is October 11th, we have this workshop on process design, where we're going to sort of do this, but with a kind of greater focus in terms of figuring out, okay, what is this experiment going to look like for the next year? With the idea that we'll redesign it again in a year from now.
Yeah, yes. So we'd love to have all of your participation, and if you have students that you think would be interested in this as well, we're very happy to embrace everyone's participation in this.
Yeah, and I will say that, so we have this event on October 11th, which is about the design of the process. Then we have the seminar in January, and if you can go to one and not the other, that's totally fine, right? The event in October is about having as many voices in the room as possible to move forward. And then it might be, you know, 3 or 5 people that come to present the science seminar. So just so you know, they're connected, but they're separate as well.
Yeah, and we're very understanding of the time commitments that you have within your own field, and we certainly don't want to impinge on that, but we are hopeful that you do have some time to give to this other community of an area. And like Randy says, you know, you might be involved in one part but not have time for another part, or say someone else that isn't here might be interested in kind of doing a relay back and forth where someone's making work and then they can contact them, talk about it, whether it's the blog or Saping, and then it goes back to them, so kind of a back and forth kind of
Or the
thing.
collaborative model that you're proposing, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's lots of ways to be involved if
Yeah.
you're interested.
I think that's just, I just want to pick up on that. I think that's a real beauty in how Ingrid and Randy are thinking this through. There's a lot of flexibility with that to allow for people to plug in and get involved with how their time commits. And I think especially going through the year, there's quite a bit of ability for that. So if you're interested or you want to know a little bit more, please come see me or come talk to Nick, and we'll have kind of some more details about how to get involved on October 11th. It's going to be over at Emily Carr, which is the TRIUMF, to go see you on your campus.
We can also make time for tours if you want, before or after the event. We can take you through the workshops, just to kind of get a sense of what our machines look like. our space again.
And the bookstore, I have to say, over at Emily Carr, it's one of my favorite places in Vancouver. It's just such a cool.
So this is really exciting. This is kind of, this is what we want. We want to have these kind of conversations, and we want to, the conversation itself is fantastic, and also then what we can do with it and work more. So it's like beauty for such an extended time, and I think it would be so productive for us. Okay.
Thank you.
So we're here. If you ever want to come up and ask questions, or yeah, please talk to Lisa, and you can ask more questions in other ways.
Or if you know others who are interested too, then there's a number of people from our community who are interested as well. So I've heard of from students and all through there's opportunities available.
Yeah, so people, if you know people that might be interested, and you know, you have the handout that we gave you, but if you have follow-up questions, if you're not quite sure, but we're excited to work with you. So. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you for coming.